6 years ago, Jim from The Office made a small budget horror film called A Quiet Place, and now here in 2024 we have the third entry into this horror franchise. This franchise, now containing 3 films, is now eligible for me to rank it, so that is exactly what we're going to be doing today. Before I get into my ranking, I'd like to hear yours, so please make sure to leave that in the comments down below. But yeah, with that all said, let's get into my ranking of all 3 A Quiet Place films.
And I'm feeling good.
Now in last place I have A Quiet Place Day 1. While it is in last place, it's by no means a bad film. I actually really enjoyed it, but when you're comparing to the other 2, it didn't meet up to the same standards. Now obviously this is a spin-off as opposed to the other 2 being part of the main story, and this one is very different in terms of concept, time, and just general location. That's where this franchise really lends itself to a franchise, as the first 2 films are establishing like a small town area, no people around at all, and this one shifts things back to, well, obviously day 1 of this apocalypse where people didn't know about the aliens' strengths and weaknesses. They didn't really expect this to happen, so just seeing how people adjust to that was very fascinating, and not to mention that it took place in the most heavily populated city in the world, thus making it a very loud city. As a viewer, it was fun coming into this knowing what those aliens' weaknesses were and ways you can get around things, and then seeing these new characters discover that. I just found it very cool and fun to see it from a different perspective. The first 2 films had this family dynamic, and while there isn't necessarily one here, there is still that human aspect of Lupita Nyong'o's character, who does a really good job as well. I don't want to go into too many specifics because it's not actually advertised in the trailers or kind of in the synopsis, so I'll keep that quiet, but there's a very wholesome feeling about her and her relationship to Joseph Quinn's character as this film progresses. As I said, this spin-off isn't as good as the other 2 films, but it still has some great moments. It can easily create such great tension, but those moments are inconsistently scattered across this whole runtime. You either have large portions of the horror elements or long windows away from this horror, and it kind of just goes back to the drama side, which is fine, but the way it was deployed just felt very inconsistent, and not to mention there were several parts of the plot, mainly the cat, which required a lot of suspension of disbelief. Well, obviously this is an alien invasion film, but still there were some parts which I felt a bit clunky at points and didn't exactly add up. But nonetheless, I still really enjoyed this film. Just when you're comparing it to the other 2, it's not exactly fair, as it doesn't really stand much of a chance.
Somewhere beyond the sea.
Sequels to successful horror films do not have a good track record at all. Just take any classic or iconic horror film, and then there's bound to be a lackluster sequel to follow it. But A Quiet Place Part 2 kind of goes against all of that and delivers a fantastic second outing. While not as strong, hence why it's in second place, there's still plenty to enjoy about it, and it's a direct continuation of their story as well. As we've now got an entire film with the latest release, here we got a glimpse into these characters' experience on the first day of the apocalypse, and that really was the taste that we needed before getting Quiet Place Day 1. But yeah, it was very terrifying seeing how these characters went through this, and as I've mentioned before, not knowing these aliens' weaknesses and strengths, so it kind of turned into a bit of a massacre. From a horror perspective, A Quiet Place was brilliant, but I felt personally it was the family dynamic that was developed throughout. And with John Krasinski's character not really being in this film much, you really feel his absence, and not to mention that the family dynamic is quite split up, as one character's doing something else away from the rest of the family and vice versa. You lost a bit of that magic and tension for trying to keep that family safe. It is present, just not as strong. It may benefit the characters individually as they get more screen time individually and more time to develop, but as that family dynamic, the magic isn't as strong. It's still a thoroughly enjoyable horror film and is really solid. You know, you've got so many stressful scenarios and the sound design continues to be fantastic. But as I said, it really is that family dynamic which made the first one so special. So when you've taken a lot of that out of here, while it is a good horror film, you can't help but feel like something was just missing. And And that leaves the original in at first place, and this was such a big surprise. Directorial debuts from actors can go either way, and I know John Krasinski had directed some episodes of The Office, but in terms of a full feature-length film, it's a completely different story, not to mention that horror is very different from, you know, comedy that The Office was. And it just seemed like during this period of time there was a lot of horror films involving the senses. You know, you had Bird Box, where you weren't allowed to use your vision. There was Don't Breathe, where the lead character was deaf. And then you had this film, and it just felt like there was a bit of a theme going on in the late 2010s. But yes, this film was brilliant. I love it even more every time I watch it. As I've mentioned before in this video, it's the family dynamic which keeps this film so strong, because there aren't too many of these horror elements, but when they are here, they're very effective. Especially that cold open. Not only are those horror sequences just well executed, but it's that dynamic that, as I've said, elevates it to another level where the tension can just be unbearable sometimes. There's a real lack of sound in this entire film, obviously, but even music, there's not much, so any little sound puts you on the edge of your seat and holding your breath. It's a real testament to the direction of this film, because as there's barely any sound used, there's also barely any dialogue used, and I know there's, you know, ASL used, but still there is such a realistic feeling of a family here. You know, there's love, but there's also some issues there, but it's just all executed fantastically, and that's a really impressive thing to pull off in a film like this. This film is PG-13, so if you're able to pull off a horror film just like this with that rating, it's very impressive. And once again, it's all about the story. It's not about how scary everything is. If the story is well executed and the characters are well executed, it can make those horror moments a lot scarier, and I think that's what this film does extremely well. So yeah, for me it was a no-brainer to have A Quiet Place come in at first place. So that was my ranking of all three A Quiet Place films. As I mentioned in the beginning, please let me know what yours is down below, as I'm eager to hear. But I feel as though a lot of people have a similar ranking to this. I feel like I've done it a lot recently, but I'm going to apologize again for my lack of activity. It's been a very hectic month, and if you're a returning viewer, you will notice that my setup's a little bit different. You know, I've been kind of redoing this entire room that I've been filming in, so that's been one of the reasons why it's been so long since my last upload. Combine that with just being really busy with work, gaining some extra hours, and I'll be honest, just a bit of perhaps laziness from me as well. But yeah, I'm looking to try and get back into the swing of things. I'll have a ranking for The Bear coming out shortly after this, I hope. And I know these two videos would be quite late, but I feel I have to get them done. So yeah, I apologize again once for that, but thank you for your patience if you are a returning viewer, and I hope to see you in that next video.